Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to my kitchen. Today is Wednesday. It is October 18th. You may hear this laptop over on the side that I'm pointing at speak a little bit. I am donating this to a nonprofit organization that helps my community run a food pantry. It also helps women that are starting out in life or are trying to set up computers and stuff. So it's an older computer and it's a Windows operating computer. And as you guys know, I operate predominantly on the Apple or the Macintosh version of the computer. So I am donating this free and clear to the organization, and I am volunteering on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it's something that I've been wanting to do for a very, very long time, and I'm glad and thrilled that I'm going to be a part of this organization. So, forgive me for one second. I need to do this while I don't forget, so... Okay, so, in the videos that you guys saw that I posted on Wednesday, and I'm sorry if I don't upload the videos the next day, especially if I'm filming in between. If I'm filming on Monday or Wednesday, you guys will not see the videos update Tuesday and Thursday. You'll see them upload either Wednesday or Friday. So there's going to be a lag from here on out for the videos, or they're going to be really late videos, and I'm going to try not to make them too late. But the video that I posted that you guys saw on Wednesday or today, because you're going to see this on Friday, we talked about the rye bread and the bread machine. And there were several things that I noticed with the rye bread that didn't come out really well. One, the rye bread was really, really heavy, and it was a very, very small loaf. It was a 2-pound loaf, at least. It was a very heavy loaf. But the consistency and taste was not quite what I was looking for. So my husband was nice enough, and he printed out some bread making machine recipes that are different from the booklet that came with the bread making machine. And I figured we're going to try this one today. And this one's a tad bit different because this one actually uses butter, molasses, and brown sugar. It also uses a cocoa powder. Now, I'll get into those recipes in a little bit. We're gonna start making this to try. And you guys might be asking yourselves why I'm making my own bread when I could easily go out and purchase rye bread. Well, you're right. I can go to the grocery store and I can buy my own bread. But I think it's fun to make homemade bread once in a while. Now, this is not going to necessarily be a weekly thing that I do in the kitchen, but on occasion, if we need sandwich bread or white bread, or my husband wants a rye bread, I don't have a problem making a homemade bread. And again, like I said, what you buy in the grocery store, the processed breads, all have added chemicals to them to enhance their longevity. Otherwise, breads in the grocery store wouldn't be able to sit on the shelf, and when you look at them, you would almost have to use them that same week. Sometimes when you go to the grocery store, you can get it, it'll have a date used by, and it might be 2 weeks later. Well, that's because of the preservatives that they add to the bread that makes them last longer. Now, homemade breads have very short lifespans, unless you freeze them. And usually it's 3 to 5 days for your bread before your bread starts to break down and gets moldy or starts to do its natural thing. So, like I said, we're going to try this recipe, and we're going to do another 2-pound loaf. So I'm going to stop the video for a few minutes because I'm not quite ready for that part, but when I pick it back, we'll go over the recipes for a 2-pound loaf, and I will get the ingredients. The one main ingredient for this one is it wants softened butter. Now it wants unsalted butter, which I do have. This happens to be salted. So if you're going to use a salted butter, what you're going to do is you're going to decrease the amount of salt you actually put in the bread. Now, this recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So you can actually cut the teaspoon of salt down to 1.25 teaspoons versus the full 1.5. So I'm going to stop the video. I'll pick it back up in a bit, and we'll get cooking. Okay, hi all, welcome back. I've got all of my ingredients pretty much laid out. I don't have them measured though. So, bread machine should be unplugged, which it is. Remove the bread pan. Okay, this time it wants me to remove the bread pan, so I'm going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to put the bread pan right here. And we're going to start this recipe so they cannot accidentally spill into the machine. So you want to be very careful when it comes to spilling in the machine. I'm going to put this down. I'm going to read out the ingredients. I'm going to put you guys up so you guys, of course, can see my smiling face. You might notice that I'm wearing the same outfit. Well, this is just my PJs or my comfy clothes around the house. When I'm not doing anything, I don't usually dress unless I'm doing something big. Speaking of something big, and I know there's a video out already on it, but next week happens to be my husband and my 24th wedding anniversary. So I am going to do a prime rib roast. I know there's a video of that. I may film the prime rib roast because we're going to do it slightly different. This time we're not going to do it on the egg. We're going to do it in the oven, the traditional way, and I probably will film that. So that'll be posted on Wednesday since I'm taking Tuesday off of next week. Before we get into the bread making thing, I also need to say a little announcement. The furniture has been delayed, and it's only been delayed a couple of days right now. Now it's set to be delivered on Halloween, which should be fun with all the trick-or-treaters, but hopefully the furniture arrives that day. If it does not arrive that day, it'll be pushed sometime into November. So we'll see how that goes. So that was just an update on the furniture. So this recipe says, okay, pour the water into the bread pan and then add the other ingredients. Now my manufacturers, and if you're wondering what type of bread machine, and I think I said it when I was doing the Rye Bread, I'll say it again, it's a Cuisinart. This is a Cuisinart. My grandmother's is the Philips, and I do know that it's the Philips because I remember that was the only bread making machine that she had an option to buy that would make the sizes that she wanted, and I think hers does up to a 2.5 pound loaf of bread. And again, I'll say this again, I believe hers is buried somewhere in my garage. It's either in the garage or it's upstairs in the attic, and I'm not going to look for it. So, it wants the water first, and for a 2-pound loaf, it's 1.5 cups of lukewarm water. And this is pretty much lukewarm. So we're going to put that in the bread making thing. Now, because you just used water, there was only water in your glass measuring cup, all you really need to do is dry it out, and then you can put it right away. You don't need to wash it because it was just water. And forgive me for 1 second, I'm just going to do that, and I think I have the antivirus set up on here. Oh, wait. to see where the antivirus is. Oop. Hopefully that'll do it. Okay. Oh, run smart scan. Okay. Notification. Passive mode. Passive mode. Oh, can you turn that off? Okay, there we go. Okay, so after you pour the water in the pan, sorry, I'm doing two things at once. You know how I can get. Okay, now it says pour the water into the pan, then add the other ingredients. Now it's very important when you add the other ingredients that you do it in the order that your bread machine maker wants you to do. So the yeast is always going to be the last thing that you put in to your bread making pan. So the next thing is the 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Again, doesn't matter if you're using salted versus unsalted. For some recipes, yes, it does matter. For others, it does not. If you don't have unsalted butter and you have salted butter, what you're going to do is you're going to decrease the amount. If a recipe also calls for salt, you're going to decrease the salt that you're going to add to the recipe. So I'm just going to cut these into little squares. It doesn't specify that you need to do that, but you know what? It never hurts to cut them into little cubes because you don't want big chunks of butter in your bread. So I'm just, again, cutting them into little chunks and putting them in. And I've got one more to do. And they don't have to be uniform. And you don't want your butter so softened that it becomes runny. You just want it soft where it's pliable. I'm gonna move you guys up for a second. So I'm gonna get a little off track. I'm getting excited about the furniture. I can't wait for you guys to see the finished product of the kitchen. There's still a little bit of blue, and you can tell, well, you guys can't from this vantage point, so I'm not going to point it out. But I do have a little bit of paint on the cabinets. And my husband was like, how are we going to get that off? And I'm like, water and we're just going to scrub. So let's get back into this. Okay, so the next ingredient is 2 cups of bread flour. Now this recipe does want bread flour versus all-purpose flour. And because this recipe says bread flour, there are 2 types of bread flour. There is a quick rise bread flour, and then there's an all-purpose bread flour. You want the all-purpose bread flour that is not the quick rise. And again, I use King Arthur. If you guys are regulars to my channel, you know that I am a big fan of King Arthur's products. I have had many successful meals with King Arthur, and that is my preference to go to. But any type of bread flour will work as long as you don't use the quick rise. So that's the first cup. Now we're going to do the second cup. And that is the second cup. Okay. So the second thing on the second thing is 2 cups of rye flour. Now again, I talked a little bit when I posted the other rye bread about rye flour. This happens to be dark. I did find out they do make it in a light version. And I think it's personal preference or what you can get. I am going to be ordering some flours off of the King Arthur website since my grocery store doesn't carry all of the flours that King Arthur sells. And I know one flour that my husband wants me to get is the sourdough. And I'm definitely going to do that. I'm a big fan of sourdough bread. I love sourdough bread. So again, so this is 2 cups, so that's the first cup. And this is cup number 2. And you really don't want to pack your flour. And that's cup number 2. Okay, so I'm just going to store my bread flour back in its little glass jar. I'm liking these glass jars. I've only had them a couple of days, but they're not ideal because if you look at the glass jar, it does not have any type of ring that actually makes these glass jars airtight. So this is probably not something I would store my sugar in. My husband's sugar should be fine. It's tight enough for that. But for regular sugar, I wouldn't necessarily do that. So let's get back to this recipe. So this recipe is going to use 2 tablespoons of molasses and 4 tablespoons of light brown sugar packed. Okay, now you need to be careful. This is where you need to be careful, or you need to have multiple measuring spoons. So I'm going to flip you guys around. And again, you're seeing my beautiful hutch. And I'm just grabbing another set of measuring spoons. And so far, I will be honest and say I am really liking the hutch. I've been using the hutch quite a bit, and it's a very nice hutch. You might be asking where I bought the hutch from. Well, Home Depot originally had it on their website, but then they sold out of a couple of the colors. And Home Depot actually does not have it in stock. It's an online order only. But this exact same hutch was found on Amazon, and we got ours from Amazon. So, this calls for 2 tablespoons of molasses, and this is what molasses looks like. Now, I know they make a light and a dark molasses. This recipe does not specify between the either, so I think that's personal preference if you want the light or the dark. And it wants 2 tablespoons. And you want to be very, very careful with your molasses, because molasses is incredibly sticky and will go over everything if you're not careful. So that's the first one. And that's why it's always good when you're measuring out molasses. Measure it out in a bowl. Because, like I said, molasses is very, very sticky, and it can be a pain in the butt to clean. So, that was the 2 tablespoons of molasses. And one thing about molasses is you don't need to refrigerate molasses when you open it. Always read the label. I always tell people, read the label, because the label will tell you whether or not something needs to be refrigerated or not. And this says refrigeration not necessary. Okay, so now that the molasses is in there, now what we're going to do is we are going to add 4 tablespoons of light brown sugar packed. Now this does specify, and brown sugar does come in light and dark. This recipe does specify light brown sugar versus dark brown sugar. So make sure you have the light brown sugar and not the dark. And since this, and again, sometimes you guys may for the next 3 or 4 weeks find me kind of stalling to do something. It's because things, I'm trying new layout of where things are in the kitchen. So not everything in the kitchen may be where I want. So it wants 4 tablespoons of light brown sugar packed. Now, what that just means is when you put your spoon in, you're going to press down on it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do the same thing that you do with your flour. You're just going to scoop it and measure, and that's now a pack. So that's 1. Here comes that's number 2. Here comes number 3. That's number 3. And here comes number 4. And that's number 4 of the brown sugar. And I'm going to get a new food saver because this one is kind of done with. I've used that several times. So, the next ingredients is 1.5 tablespoons of cocoa powder. And again, if you don't know what cocoa powder is, this is what cocoa powder looks like. You want to make sure you get the unsweetened version of cocoa powder. And you want to make sure it says natural. You don't want the artificial cocoa powder. And this one's 1.5 tablespoons. So out. And again, you want to be a little bit careful with this too, because this can go all over the place. Okay, and it wants a half. So it's a half, 1.5 tablespoons. So So that's the 1.5. And make sure you always cover your cocoa powder when you're done with it. And always make sure whenever you're doing something in the kitchen that you always clean up your mess right away. Don't leave it sitting. Unless you're baking something and it's coming out of the oven, obviously you want to wait for things to cool down. But when you're measuring out ingredients, just give your kitchen a little bit of a cleanup before you start other things. That just makes it much easier as you go through a recipe, that you're not waiting until the last second when everything is ready to be baked, and then you have an even bigger mess to do. Okay, so now we're going to add the caraway seeds. Now this one uses 1 teaspoon of caraway seeds. I think that's a little bit less, or not enough for what we like. So I'm going to load this up. I'm actually going to use a full tablespoon. And of course, caraway seeds are optional. You do not need to use caraway seeds if you don't want caraway seeds in your bread, but I think caraway seeds taste good. They give the bread a nice texture, and they give you a very nice flavor, especially if you're using the rye bread for if you're going to use the rye bread for other things. Okay, so, oh, now we use 1.5 teaspoons of salt, but because we used the salted butter, I'm going to decrease the amount of salt. And pardon me. Ooh, pardon me, I had to sneeze there. Okay. And I'm using the kosher salt. This does not specify kosher salt or iodized salt. I kind of like the texture of the kosher salt. Okay, so 1.5. So that was quarter, so... And this is this is teaspoon, so... Okay, that's good. Okay, and then last but not least, you're gonna use 1.5 teaspoons of bread machine yeast. So this is what I'm using, the Fleischmann's, or Fleischmann's, however you want to say it. I call it it is Fleischmann's bread yeast. It's the yellow labeled. It's the yellow label container for bread machines. The red is the all-star active dry yeast, and then they make another one, and I think it's blue, but I don't remember. I think the blue is the quick rise yeast, and it wants 1.5 teaspoons. So that's one. Come on. Half. Yeah, the little monsters are gonna go out. So that's 1.5. And I did make a slight mistake when I did the cocoa powder. I only put 1/2 teaspoon, so I'm gonna add just a little bit more cocoa powder to this. And I don't think that really matters. Okay, so that's everything in there. Now I'm going to flip over the instructions. So if you guys want the ingredients again, I'm going to do it really fast. It was 1.5 cups of lukewarm water. It was 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter softened. Again, we use salted, so decrease your salt. It's 2 cups of bread flour, 2 cups of rye flour, 2 tablespoons of molasses, 4 tablespoons of light brown sugar, and you want to make sure you pack that in your tablespoons. 1.5 tablespoons of cocoa powder, naturally unsweetened. This recipe says 1 teaspoon of caraway seeds. You can put more in if you're a fan of caraway seeds, or you can leave the caraway seeds out. It's optional and it's personal preference of what your like is. 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So if you're using unsalted butter, go with the 1.5 teaspoons of salt. If you're using salted butter, decrease the 1.5 teaspoons to 1 1/4 teaspoons. And then it wants 1.5 teaspoons of bread machine yeast. And again, that's the Fleischmann's yellow label is the bread machine yeast. So now that we have everything in, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to pop this into our bread making pan. Here we go. We're going to lock it into place. Now we're going to plug this in. Okay. And what we are going to do is programmed on 1. We're going to turn this to the 2-pound loaf. We're going to do I think that's a light color. I think that's like, we're hoping that's light color. And press the start button. Okay, and it's gonna go ahead and knead. So, I know I didn't take a picture of the other rye bread when it came out. This time I will, so I'm gonna stop the video now. It's gonna take 3.5 hours for this to finish. It's 1:15, so at 3:45 the bread should be done. I will be back later and show you the final product.